Hi, thank you very much for having me today. Sorry for the delay in starting. So I'm Jessica Miller, and I work as an editorial coordinator for the Royal Society Publishing. Work across two journals, Journal of the Royal Society Interface and Interface Focus. And those journals are at the boundary of the physical and the life sciences. First of all, I'm going to be giving a talk on open science, just introducing some of the concepts, and then I'm going to leave plenty of time for kind of questions and answers at the end, because I know it's quite a sort of topical topic. So first of all, I'm going to go over what I mean by open science. So there are a number of concepts that are included in open science activities. These include open access publication, open data mandates, transparent peer review, depositing work on preprint servers, pre-registration and replication, and also recognising the contributions of peer reviewers. And open science advocates hope that opening up science will improve the quality of research and its ability to be replicated. It is hoped that innovations such as preprint servers, which I'll talk about a bit more later, are ways to speed up research. So not only does better research get to those who need it, but arrives there more rapidly. Many funders of science, especially public funders, require work to be open access. And there are different models of open access which exist. These include diamond or platinum. This is essentially free to authors and readers. Gold, which often involves paying a fee to a publisher to publish, rather than the reader paying to access. And green, which is a free option where the author self-archives. And each model has its pros and cons. So diamond is optimal for the researcher and reader costs and has many practical advantages of open access. However, there may be questions or concerns about the financial sustainability of the model. Funding for the diamond model can come from a variety of sources, including society funds and donor funds. Gold is good for readers and for publishers, and also allows authors to widely share and reuse their research while retaining copyright. However, often authors need to pay an article processing charge. It is worth bearing in mind at this point that not all publishers are commercially minded, and profits generated by society publishers often go back into supporting other charitable activities. So, for example, the profits generated by Royal Society Publishing go back into some of the other activities carried out by the Royal Society as a whole, for example, our public engagement activities. And green open access is the second cheapest option for researchers. However, it is much more limited in scope, and authors may have to give up the copyright of their article. And here on this slide, I've got some of the advantages of open access to authors, readers, and publishers. These aren't exhaustive, and I'm not going to go through kind of all of them in depth. Quite a few of them we've kind of talked about already. I'm just going to pick out a few examples. So, as I said, many funders now require work to be published open access. So this can help to meet funder mandates. Also means that readers can easily reuse published work, providing they cite the publication. And there are a number of ways at the Royal Society that we support open access publishing. So firstly, two of our journals, that's Open Biology and Royal Society Open Science, are fully open access. And secondly, all of our journals have open access options. So this means the author can decide whether or not they want to publish open access or not. These are known as hybrid journals. Thirdly, 4 of our journals, that's Proceedings A, Proceedings B, Biology Letters, and Journal of the Royal Society Interface, are transformative journals. And this means that they will move to a fully open access model once 75% of articles are being published open access. And we also have a number of prepaid open access options for authors that have been agreed with institutional libraries. So, for instance, our read and publish deals are based on a model in which the library pays any article processing charge fees directly rather than requiring the author to pay. So, for example, we have a read and publish agreement with the University of Cambridge, which means any open access fees for University of Cambridge authors who publish with us are already covered. And this can help take the financial pressure off the authors. Because obviously authors often have to pay out of their sort of grants, and open access publishing can be a large cost. So transformative agreements are a way of trying to address this in a way that's really sort of fair for the authors and makes it easier for them. And there are a large number of institutions around the world involved in read and publish deals with us, and that number continues to grow year on year. An alternative approach for this are open access membership schemes. And in this model, institutions pay an upfront fee to the society, and in return, authors at those institutions receive a discount on their article processing charge fee. And we also support researchers who may be institutions that do not have the resources to pay for open access. So, for example, we support the Research for Life initiative, and this grants institutions and individuals in developing countries free open access publishing. And for our transformative journals, free access to paywalled content. And I'm now going to move on to talk about some of the other aspects of kind of open science beyond open access. First of all, I'm going to talk about open data. So a key feature of open science is access to the increasing availability of research data. And data here generally not only means the results from your study that support your paper's conclusions, but also other digital material and code or details of algorithms. For example, a researcher working in paleontology may not only provide details of where the fossils can be found, but also scans and photographs, as well as other measurements taken. So it's really trying to encourage data which is sort of fully inclusive of the samples. And there are a number of advantages of depositing data. So firstly, it allows research outputs to be verified and helps others avoid errors and build on your work. And some repositories will also provide DOIs, which means you have another citable output to cite. And publishers are increasingly partnering with third-party providers of data repositories to make it as simple and cheap as possible for researchers to deposit their data. So Royal Society Publishing have a partnership with Dryad, and this means that we will cover the costs of depositing data to the Dryad repository. And this will become increasingly important, these sort of partnerships, as we think about the future of open science, and I'll come on to that later on. And again, wanting to go through some of the advantages of open data, both to authors, to readers, and also to the scientific enterprise as a whole. And so we've gone over quite a few of these already. A lot of these are quite interlinked. Means data can be reused and repurposed, means that it can be tested and sort of verified more easily. And then next, I'm going to be going on to talk about transparent peer review. So I'm sure many of you will experience that peer review can sometimes be seen as a bit of a black box, and the process or the reasons why a paper has been published may be a bit unclear. And transparent peer review is a way to kind of open up that black box and show the journey that's been taken to publication. So there are a number of journals that operate a single anonymous transparent peer review model. And in this model, the referee identities are anonymous, although referees are allowed to sign their reviews if they want to. However, this is not mandatory. However, the outputs, including the reviewer comments, editor comments, decision letter, and author rebuttals, are made available with the accepted paper. And the value of transparent peer review lies not only in helping readers to understand why a paper was published, but can maybe help reduce some of the biases in the review process. So if all parties know their comments will be accessible after publication, it is hoped that better reports might be prepared. And there are some key advantages of transparent peer review, which are shown on this slide. The relative advantage for authors is denoted by an A. The relative advantage for reviewers is denoted by an R. And there are also, again, advantages for readers and the scientific enterprise as a whole. A lot of these are quite sort of interlinked, but briefly, readers can learn from other reviewers by seeing published reviews. This could be particularly helpful for kind of early career researchers as they're learning to write reviews. And it's hoped that it could encourage really well-written reviews if the referees know that their comments will be made public. And now I'm going to go on to talk about another aspect of open science that's become increasingly important in the last few years, and that is preprints. So these have been common in some fields for some time, particularly on the physical sciences side of things. However, more and more preprints servers are now becoming available, and many more fields have options to deposit their work in preprint servers. So, for example, you have Research Square, which covers a range of different fields. You also have BioArchive, which is specific to biology. And preprints allow authors to share their work prior to formal peer review. So effectively, they can hopefully get some feedback, which will strengthen the quality of their manuscript before they formally submit it to a journal. And they also allow authors to claim for ideas, if most recognized preprint servers assign DOIs to deposited manuscripts. It is worth noting at this point that journals, funders, researchers, and research assessment bodies may see preprints in different terms from one another in regards to what constitutes a publication. And this can also vary depending on the academic field. So, for example, researchers in certain fields may consider depositing a manuscript in a preprint server to be almost equivalent to publication. However, many assessments bodies or funding bodies may not see it in this way and may not also require a peer-reviewed publication in a journal. It is also worth bearing in mind that while many journals do not consider preprints to be publication, and it will not prejudice the chances of being published if you've got a preprint, other journals may see things differently And if you have a preprint, it may prejudice the chance of being published. We take the form review, so if you deposit a preprint, no means it won't impact the chances of being published in a Royal Society journal, and we very much encourage preprints. And next, I'm going to be talking about the importance of kind of reproducibility. So as well as opening up the outputs of scientific research, many publishers and other organizations are trying to encourage a culture that not only permits but actively promotes reproducible science. And I'm going to touch on three aspects of this. They're all quite kind of interlinked with each other, as you will see. So the first of these is registered reports. And these have been common in psychology and related fields for some years, but they are becoming more widely spread across other fields. And they're a type of article in which the peer review process is split into two parts. So the first phase assesses the proposed study design to test, for instance, the statistical power of the proposed methods and analysis. And if the reviewers and editors are satisfied by this stage 1 registered report, it receives an in-principle acceptance. And the authors then register this study design in a suitable repository before conducting their work according to the agreed study design that's already been approved. And secondly, in the second stage, another round of review takes place. However, and this is quite important, the referees and editors do not assess the paper based on the study's outcome. What they are assessing is whether the study was conducted according to the stage 1 report that's already been approved. And as long as they've conducted the study as agreed in stage 1, it will be accepted for publication regardless of the study's outcome. And the next are replication studies, and a growing number of publishers are providing avenues for formal replications of existing work, and this should be encouraged. And again, studies should be assessed on the study design rather than the actual results. And it's encouraged to actually register replication studies through, for example, through registered reports. And finally, the assessment and publication of negative studies is another important part of reproducibility. This includes studies that try to demonstrate a null effect and those that demonstrate a failure of design or outcome. And both registered reports and replication studies can be avenues for the publication of negative or null studies. And it is worth bearing in mind that, for some studies, there may be a negative or null outcome. And it is important that we publish these studies because it could help others with their research. And now for the final part of the talk, I'm going to start to explore some of the future directions for open science. And this will bring together some of the concepts and some of the ideas I've kind of talked about already. So to address where next, I'll be starting off with some of the Royal Society's work in this space. So in 2015, the Society hosted the Future of Scientific Scholarly Communication Conference. And this formed part of the celebrations to mark 350 years of publication for the Philosophical Transaction Journals. And these are the world's oldest continuously published journals. And a range of stakeholders came to this conference, including early career researchers, senior scientists, representatives from industry, science communicators, and many more. And underpinning many of these discussions was the kind of concept of open science. And there are several kind of topics that stood out, which are kind of listed on this slide. So firstly, encouraging greater collaboration between stakeholders, encouraging shift in research culture, as well as encouraging kind of more data sharing, preprint service, as well as post-publication peer review. And the report can be read online from the link I've provided. And the second one I'm going to touch on was the Science as an Open Enterprise report, which came out of a large study in 2012 conducted by the Royal Society. And this was looking at the use of scientific information as it affects scientists and society. And it aims to identify the principles, opportunities, and problems of sharing and disclosing scientific information, and asks how scientific information should be managed to support innovative and productive research that reflects public values. And we would also recommend taking a look at the link to look at the full study for kind of more insights into the topic of open science. And finally, just looking at some of the themes that we want to consider in the future. So there are quite a lot of ideas of thinking, you know, where is open science going? Just going to pick out a few of things. So firstly, we want to ensure that we build upon what exists already and continue to build in the right direction. So for example, where open science practices already exist, so in data sharing or pre-registration, this should be encouraged or even mandated. So, you know, we want to strengthen what is working already and build on it. So many funders have open access mandates, and many publishers, including the Royal Society, require data sets to be available at publication. However, there is more that can be done here. So firstly, data and other supporting materials should be accessible to reviewers and editors at initial submission. And ideally, a mandate would also exist for editors and reviewers to assess the data sets. However, we do recognise that this poses a number of challenges for everyone involved. So firstly, authors will need to keep up to date with best practice for data sharing in their field. Publishers and journals will need to ensure that submission systems are integrated with multiple repositories to minimise the costs and effort required by authors. So I was talking earlier about our integration and our covering the cost of Dryad. So we need to kind of strengthen those types of collaborations for multiple different data types. Editors and reviewers will need to have both the time and expertise to assess data submitted to journals. We all know that academics are very, very busy, particularly peer reviewers, so this is another topic for discussion. And some publishers are going a step further and launching journals which review data and/or protocols. And rather than publishing complete papers, these journals might publish curated data sets as discrete pieces of work, which can be cited and credited to the group that generated the data. As I mentioned, sort of reviewer fatigue, so more work to address reviewer fatigue is needed. Experiments have been carried out for some time by some publishers, such as eLife and F1000, and research into forms of collaborative peer review or fully open peer review as sort of part of some of these experiments. So in eLife's model, there is a consensus peer review, which is generated by editors and reviewers working together. This is then communicated to the authors so they can respond to that. And other models of open peer review include those provided by the Peer Community In or PCI service. And this is where preprints are recommended by and reviewed by editors and reviewers in the open. They can then be left at that or submitted to one of a group of journals associated with PCI for consideration for publication. And some platforms have also developed and options for kind of authors to submit for review and publication, just kind of sections of papers, and this can also help. And I've already touched on some of the funding models earlier in this talk, such as transformative agreements, but we expect these to grow and evolve, just to think about the best sort of funding options for all the parties involved. And finally, a more collaborative research culture would help open science. And for this to happen, funders, institutions, and all the players in the scholarly communication ecosystem need to ensure they reward science sort of for the greater good, and reward a collaborative approach rather than one that just centers on kind of more individual competition. And I really hope this has been a helpful introduction to open science. But if you'd like any more information, please do get in touch. We can be found on Twitter, Facebook, our journals websites, and by email. I also have a stand in the exhibition hall, so come along to the Royal Society Publishing stand, stand 10, to talk to me and pick up some leaflets. I'll be here all week. And now I'd just like to open up to any questions that anyone may have.
In November 2021, in November 2021, UNESCO came out with their recommendation for open science, one of which, it was 4 pillars, which included, in one of the pillars was everything you've discussed here, which is great. One of the pillars, though, an important one, is outreach to underserved communities, marginalized researchers, indigenous populations, et cetera, et cetera. So what are there anything that Royal Society is planning, doing currently for initiatives like reduced cost, alternative languages, working with specific communities?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Research for Life initiative, and we are very much in favour of kind of waivers for those who might be institutions who are underserved. We also very aware of kind of diversity. So, you know, in terms of kind of editorial boards and reviewers, we want to kind of be aware of both kind of gender and geographical diversity. And as I said, you know, with the transformative agreements, you know, we are aware this isn't perfect, but we are trying to think about evolving funding models and trying to get sort of different actors on board. So it is something we are very much aware of. And I mean, we've recently employed actually a new kind of outreach colleague, so I can sort of feedback some of this to her. And I think it is, yeah, really, really important that we reach those sort of underserved communities and people who may not necessarily feel like they've had a voice, and they're competing with kind of the Western countries in terms of funding and resources and everything else. So yeah, the great question. Thank you.
We have a question here.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for your presentation. I can only have the opportunity to talk to people who work in the journal, so I'll ask that for once, because like you, it's very hard to meet people like that. So from a very superficial author or reader perspective, it seems that preprints are free, whereas like all of the publication material seems to be at a fee. So I was wondering, how is it possible for it to be free? Is there someone else funding the preprint platform? And then the second question is, if there is a difference in operational cost between the preprint and the publication, where does that difference in operational cost go in the case of the publisher?
Yeah, again, great questions. So I think I mean, different preprints servers operate differently and are kind of, you know, separate, so sort of bioRxiv, Research Square. And I don't actually know exactly kind of how each preprint server is funded and kind of what their models are, but I know they do much more reduced checks, although there are some checks. I think in terms of kind of publishing and the kind of costs associated with publishing, obviously, with publishing, we do have, things like the proofreaders and the typesetting process, the way that we can help to deposit data to Dryad, integration with, for example, Figshare. So conducting the peer review process. So there's a lot more that goes into the kind of publishing process, but we do completely appreciate that kind of from an author perspective, the cost can be quite prohibitive. And, the question about, well, if preprint servers exist, why just not put everything on a preprint server? Where does publishing come into it? So I think that is a big discussion about the kind of value of journals in the world of preprint servers. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jessica. We have the last question here in the room from Susanna.
I was just wondering, with the collaborative peer review, like how do you prevent bias in the peer review process? Then, reviewers influencing each other's opinions. Sometimes, but the first reviewer that gets their word in that kind of influences the other reviewers. How do you prevent that in that setup?
Yeah, so I should actually say that collaborative peer review is more of an experiment that's being carried out by the wider publishing industry. We don't do collaborative peer review. It's, as I said, I gave the example of eLife, who do that, and I'd have to kind of look into more about exactly how that model works. So there is an eLife stand downstairs, so that would be the kind of best way to talk to. But I think they would absolutely have processes in place, and the editors who would be aware of kind of who the reviewers are. One thing that, it's very different, but of course, when an author gets a decision letter, the comments sometimes will, or when an author responds to a decision letter, certainly the other reviewers will see the other comments from the reviewers. So sometimes a part of my job is reading responses to reviewers from authors, and you'll sometimes see a reviewer said, oh, as this reviewer brought up, this also needs to be addressed. So I think there can be the slight influence anyway. But yeah, certainly there will be processes in place. As I said, I don't work on a journal that's collaborative peer review, so I'd have to kind of check. But yeah.
Thank you.
And we have just one last question.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I have a question regarding preprints, because one colleague from mine told me that it could be a disadvantage of having the preprint is that someone can steal or scoop up data from the preprint. So I don't know how risky is it, and if there's ways to prevent that.
Yeah, so there are sort of no scooping policies, which I think can sort of apply to preprint servers as well. It's not something that I've kind of come across in terms of sort of those risks. But yeah, definitely something to think about. So, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, just a comment to that. I guess it sounds for me even, I would say it sounds probably even the opposite way. Kind of, you have published it kind of, and no one can then say I was first.
Yeah. Even patents. If you put in a preprint server, you got first.
That depends.
Yes, it does depend.
That depends
I
on
agree.
the country or something.
Yes, it is true.